Welcome back, Tolkien fanatics, to another Middle-earth strategy battle game walkthrough video. So last time on this series, I talked about the 5 phases of the game and briefly ran over in about a 7-minute video exactly how the phases work. So today I'm going to move deeper into one of these phases, and it's actually going to cover a number of different things that can happen during this phase. And it's going to be technically the second phase of the game, which is the move phase. So the first phase is the priority phase, and that was again deciding who had priority simply by rolling a dice, and whoever's result was higher, that person has priority for the turn. So the move phase. You do a lot of things in the move phase. You move your models, you charge your models, you can climb up ladders, you can jump over terrain, you can leap gaps between platforms. There's all kinds of things. You can fail the test required to do any of those last 3 things I talked of, jumping, leaping, and climbing, and end up taking falling damage as well. So you can move or stand up prone models, because models could have gotten knocked prone in the prior turn. There's a lot of things you can do. So let's just start simply with movement. So I haven't gone through this yet, and I probably should take the time to break down a basic profile, which maybe I'll do in a future video. But for now, we're just going to go with this and then move down to move into that in the future. So moving. Every model in the game has a movement characteristic in their profile. And that characteristic simply states how far a model can move in a given turn. So the slowest moving ones, for example, are ones like hobbits. They're only allowed to move 4 inches. Yes, not very fast or very far. Then you can go up to 5 inches with things like goblins and dwarfs. Then 6 inches is where the majority of models reign. That's basically any man-sized model. So you're talking elves, men themselves, orcs. Sorry, drew a blank there. I was about to say dwarves, but I was like, no, dwarves move 5. So yeah, men and elves, orcs, urkai, those kind of things. They're moving 8 inches. Then you have models that can move 10 inches. I know people are sitting here going, especially experienced, hold on a second, there's something that falls in between 6 and 10. Don't worry, I'll get there. 10-inch models, and those are usually your cav-based models. They're not always cav-based models, though. So let's just talk about cav real quick, and then we'll go from there. So cav models are something like a Rider of Rohan. Everybody is very familiar with the Rider of Rohan. It is the most iconic figure from the Two Towers, okay? Especially when Éomer and Gandalf come charging down the hill with the sunlight blinding the Uruk-hai at the bottom, streaming in there, heads flying through the air. We all know a Rider of Rohan. That's a cavalry model. Okay, another iconic scene is Faramir's last quote-unquote glorious, although they all died, but we will call it a glorious charge across the fields of Pelennor to retake Osgiliath by the command of his, at that point, let's be honest, mad father, almost like the Mad King in Game of Thrones, for any of y'all out there that enjoy Game of Thrones, and a Mad King, aka at this point, Mad Stewart declaration from Denethor to go and retake Osgiliath against the, what was it, 10,000 orcs? 50,000? Some ungodly number that assaulted Minas Tirith. And it was not the most climactic, but it was definitely the coolest battle in the Return of the King. And unfortunately, before that, Faramir and his men rode out in a ill-fated charge. But those are other examples of cavalry models. Those models move 10 inches. So then we have other models that actually can move 10 inches as well. And let's talk about those for a second. There's these models called wild wargs. Have you ever heard of them? Well, the most iconic scene for that is the warg attack in the Two Towers against Théoden and his people as they're moving to Helm's Deep. So in that scene, there were actually a number of wargs that were running around riderless. And those models can move 10 inches. Now, they do count as infantry models, and they pay the price because they have a larger base. So the standard infantry model base is 25 millimeters, 0.4 millimeters shy of 1 inch. So we'll just say 1 inch at this point. 25 millimeters is the standard infantry base. The cavalry model sits on a 40 millimeter base. There are some specific exceptions to this rule. I'm looking at you, Thranduil, on your elk. There's somebody else. I'm looking at you, Azog, on the white warg. I'm looking at you, Bolg, with that really weird warg base. Okay. But for the most part, cavalry models come on a 40 millimeter base. And therefore, when they move, you're moving a 40 millimeter base. So the wargs, wild wargs, or for the Hobbit fell wargs, can also move 10 inches, even though they still count as an infantry model. We'll get into cavalry in a future video and all the bonuses and awesomeness that they are. I will say I love cavalry. Cavalry is some of the coolest things in the game. One of the greatest tools you can have in an army, not only for the hitting power, but also for the mobility. So let's jog back a second. There was that one that I missed. So there are some 8-inch moving models in the game. I will say, though, that they are few and far between. The only one that is popping right to my mind at this moment is Mahur. And I'm probably saying that name wrong, because I'm pretty sure we're all saying that name wrong, because it's a GW creation, if I do remember correctly. But Mahur is an 8-inch moving Uruk-hai scout from the Isengard list. And he has his place in 2 legendary legions, Lurtz's Scouts and Ugluk's Scouts. Imagine that. Ugluk took over when Lurtz died at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. So 8 inches is cool, and he's actually got the ability to upgrade other scout models, just in the Isengard list, to Marauders, which would give them 8-inch movement as well. So 8 inches is pretty good, especially if you're talking about your normal infantry model moving 6. You've now got a third extra movement on them, so to speak. So you're moving a third more than they are a turn, which can be really huge, especially for objective games where you need to go and nab an objective and move stuff, and go and claim things. So that's kind of basically how movement works. You look at the movement characteristic on the profile of the models you are playing, and if they are an infantry, they're 6. Now I will say this, all right? So a infantry model. Let's just take Théoden, King of Rohan, because he's a simple model to use. His movement characteristic is 6. Now, when you mount him on an armored horse. So what you have to do is go look under the cavalry section of the book to see what the movement is of a armored horse. And I'm going to be honest with you, all horses, except for a slight few, one of them being Shadowfax and the other one being, I believe it's Asphalov, can move 12. But the majority of them are 10. The difference between a regular horse and armored horse is the defense characteristics. Armored horse has armor. It's in the name. So they would be defense 5. But they would be moving 10. So in that situation, since, Théoden is now no longer a infantry keyword. And that's another thing you have to look at is the keywords in your profile. But we'll talk about that. He is now a cavalry keyword, and as such, he takes on the 10-inch movement of the mount he is on. So if you're just got a Aragorn, Strider, on foot, 6-inch movement is in his characteristic. Okay, he's moving 6 inches. What can he do with those 6 inches? Well, I'm glad you asked. He can charge enemies. That's really important. So charging, there's things called control zones, and control zone simply is a 1-inch area around a model that he quote unquote is controlling. So for those of you that are familiar with MMORPG games or other types, you know what an area of effect is, and that's when you get into range of a certain enemy or whatever in the game. They're going to be alerted to your presence and either attack you or come talk to you or look at you or do something of that nature. So the 1-inch control zone around a model is their area of effect. If you enter that, you must charge that model. So if Aragorn is moving 6 inches and crosses the control zone of an Uruk-hai, he must therefore charge that Uruk-hai. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty easy to understand. All right? So what happens if you enter 2 control zones at the same time? Well, that's good that you asked that. If you enter multiple control zones at the same time, then whoever control zone you initially... If you enter multiple control zones at the same time, then you get to pick whose control zone you want to take up. So once a model is charged, they have lost their control zone. So tactic that a lot of people will use is to send, they'll stagger their guys for control zone purposes. Well, what you can do is send a couple guys of your own, and take up those control zones, and then you can move your models past them freely as long as there's no other control zones that they will interfere with, and they have the space available to move past them without coming into base contact. So if a model is sitting in a way and he is blocking we'll say a 40 millimeter gap, okay? Well, and he's sitting square in it. Well, you can send one guy to charge him head on, but you're not going to have enough room to move your 25 millimeter base through the rest of that gap. Therefore, you cannot walk by him. You would have to just, charge him or stay out of combat range. So as long as you can move past a model without going into base contact and the control zone is negated due to the fact that you have charged him, you're good to go. Another way a control zone is negated is if a model is prone, which is something that cavalry are good at doing. When cavalry charge in and win a fight, they knock a model prone. If they fail to kill him, that model stays prone until the controlling player uses his movement phase to stand them up. And until that is done, there is no control zone, so you can just move right past him. So that's important to remember as well. So some other things that you can do in the movement phase is jumping, leaping, and climbing. So each one of those require a test on a table. If you want to jump something, you're talking about jumping a hedge. You're talking about jumping over terrain. You're not so much talking about jumping a model. You're just specifically talking more jumping terrain, jumping down from terrain, jumping over terrain. So the specifications for that is a model may jump an obstacle that is up to but no greater than its own height. So as long as the object is smaller than you or equal to your model's height, then you can jump it. So this kind of puts hobbits, dwarfs, and goblins at a disadvantage since they are smaller models. Very good for models such as, what are they? There's some really tall models in the game, and I can't remember what they are. I think Azog's a very tall model. Beorn. Beorn is extremely tall when he's in man form. He can jump over many a thing. But to do this, you take a test, and you just roll a d6, and you consult the chart. So on a roll over 1, you stumble and you fall. You fail to cross it, and your movement ends right away. On a 2 through 5, you have successfully jumped over the obstacle, but you can proceed no farther. Okay. On a 6, you effortlessly bound over it, and you may continue to use the rest of your movement. So that's important because if you roll a 6, say you move 2 inches up to the obstacle you want to jump over, you get the 6. You can therefore continue to move whatever distance is left. So if the obstacle is 1 inch wide, then you use 1 inch movement, so you can therefore use 3 more inches of your movement. So 2 to get there, 1 inch to get over, and then 3 inches you may continue to move because you have 6 inches as an infantry model. All right. Leaping. Leaping is used to get over chasms or gaps or down from terrain. You can jump down from up on high. So let's just read over this real quick. So a model can leap across a gap with a width of up to twice the height of the model. Compare the model to the gap in question if you are in doubt. If the gap is wider than twice the model's height, they cannot attempt to leap it. So that's where leaping comes into play. So that's important. If you're looking at trying to get down a piece of terrain, it just says it right there. It has to be twice. It cannot be cannot be greater than twice the height of the model. So, I mean, just straight up, with rickety walkways, yawning chasms, and other such hazards decorating our battlefields, there are plenty of opportunities for models to leap across intervening gaps. Any attempt to do this is resolved with a leap test. Okay. Jumping on, making it. Okay. I was just checking something real quick. Cool. Okay. I was just making sure I had something right. So yeah, that's leaping. Similar circumstance. Roll a d6. On a 6, you effortlessly bound across. You model leaps across without missing a step. You get to the other side, and you continue to move as far as you can for the rest of the turn, minus the distance it took you to get across the gap. So 2 through 5 is you have made it across, but you can go no further. You place your model in base contact with the edge of the chasm, walkway, whatever you were trying to move over, jump over, leap over, and you end your turn. 1. Stumble and fall. The attempt to leap the gap has gone wrong. You caught your foot. You did like me and tied your shoelaces together. Model falls to the bottom of the gap, suffering falling damage as described on page 31 and is knocked prone. So we'll get to falling damage in a moment. So the climb test, last but not least, this is something you can do. So climbing, a model attempts to make a climb test. It is important that there is some sort of way for it to scale the surface. So you're not going to be able to go up a slick barrier. You're looking for something that has handholds. For a lot of the ruins of Middle Earth, for example, you see those a lot. You can't just try and climb when you're standing in the middle of the gap of the arch. You have your model standing in the middle of the gap that is the arch. You can't just climb right there. You got to move over to where there's some sort of surface that you can climb up, okay? It says so right there. So handholds, jutting rocks, wooden crosspieces, and so on. Whenever a model climbs in this manner, they are moving through difficult terrain. Areas that do not have these are considered to be unscalable. So if you're looking at some sort of surface where it doesn't have, it's slick, there's nothing there for you to grab, then it's unscalable. It just says it right there. So difficult terrain, we didn't talk about this, but we'll cover it real quick for moving, because it is in the moving section. So areas of loose rocks, thick undergrowth, especially long grass and other terrain that make movement awkward but not dangerous is considered to be difficult terrain. This sort of ground isn't especially threatening. Indeed, it's not really dangerous at all in most circumstances, but it does tend to slow down the movement of your fighters. So what it'll end up doing is you end up taking a penalty moving through it. So you get half movement. For every inch you move 2. And if you're a cavalry model, for every inch you move, it actually counts as 4. So it's pretty bad. Just looking at some stuff real quick. Sorry, guys. So that's kind of just difficult terrain. So if you're climbing counts as difficult terrain. So you're moving at max each turn 3 inches. And you have to measure the vertical height of whatever you're scaling and then figure out how many turns it will take you to climb. And then if you start the climb, you therefore have to take a climb test at the beginning of each subsequent turn. So let's talk about climbing. So on a 6, the model climbs until it has moved its maximum move distance or reaches the top. It may even complete its move up to its maximum move distance after it reaches the top, minus the distance that you already moved. So if you're moving up, say, you move half, okay? You're going up a 2-inch thing. You take your test. You get a 6. Well, going up to 2 inches requires 4 because it counts as difficult terrain. You can therefore move this resulting 2 inches after that. All right? Or if you go up something and it's 3 inches and you move 6, well, sorry, you used your 6. Or if it's 2.5, wherefore it would take 5, you got 6 on your dice roll on the climb chart, you can move 1. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Not very often will you see something that takes 1 turn to climb. There are things out there, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there aren't. Okay, that's not true. Actually, it is pretty common. You will see that happen a lot more often than I was thinking. But yeah, that happens pretty common. I say that, and then I did the Fayetteville event recently, and that happened, where a guy climbed up the side of a rock face and was there in 1 turn. So 2 through 5, continue the climb or start the climb or whatever. So the model climbs until it has moved its maximum move or reaches the top, after which it may move no longer. So if you start and you're 1 inch away, say you're climbing something that's 7 inches tall, okay, so that's going to take you 3 turns to get up there. 3 inches the first turn, 3 inches the second turn, 2 inches the third turn, because it's 1 inch left. If you roll a 2 through 5 on that third turn, you get to move up on top of it, and that's it. You go no farther. You've basically given up those other 4 inches. Thankfully, though, you haven't fallen. So climb table on a 1, the model slips and falls to the ground and becomes prone. At the bottom of the surface, it attempts to climb. Place a prone marker next to it. If the model begins climb at ground level, it suffers no further damage. But if it was higher than this, it suffers falling damage. So, yeah, that can be an issue where, ouch, you fell. So let's just talk about this real quick. There are unscalable terrain out there. We talked about that earlier, there's stuff that just simply can't be climbed. And usually, if it's not obvious, that's up to you and your opponent that you're playing against to determine at the beginning of a game. If you're at a tournament, then the TO, the tournament organizer, will tell you at the beginning of the event and should give some sort of reminder each round about what each terrain type is. If you're ever in doubt, just ask the TO and their decision is final. So ladders, ropes, and similar. There are a number of ways to make climbing easier, such as using a ladder, a rope, or even a steep set of stairs. Climbing up or down one of these typically doesn't require a time test, and neither does it count as difficult terrain. So if you have some sort of obvious surface, like I just said, a ladder, a rope, steps, you just move your normal movement up and down them. And I will say that I have had several games where the terrain had like ruined towers, and there were ladders inside the ruined towers, and I climbed up and down the ladders to hold objectives and grab objectives. So pretty cool. So finally, falling damage. So a model that falls is knocked prone at the base of the surface that they fall from. If the model is fallen a distance greater than its own height, it immediately suffers falling damage, 1 strength 3, plus 1 additional strength 3 for every inch more than its height has fallen. So if you're talking about your model is 1.5 inches tall, okay, you fall 5 inches. I know that's a lot. So the initial, height that you are, so 5 inches minus 1.5 would be 4.5 left. So for each other full inch, for 4 more inches, you take an additional strength 3 hits. So you're talking about 5 strength 3 hits. I have seen a number of models fall to their death in said situation. It happens. It's just what happens. You got to climb something to get an objective. You want to climb something to be able to shoot at your opponent or something like that. And you just roll a 1 on the climb test, especially when you're right at the top, like that 7-inch object I was talking about earlier. There you are at the 6-inch mark, and boo, you fall to your death. It happens. Okay? So again, if you start on the ground, you're on the ground, not climbing down, but starting to climb up, and you roll a 1, you just go prone into that's it. No other damage. So prone models, when you're prone, like I said, you have no control zone. If you're holding a banner, then the banner's no use. Banners have to be upright and seen to be able to benefit from them. And we'll talk about banners under war gear in the future. Standing up, you can stand up from going prone when you're prone. That's actually something when you have priority, or when you have it happens during your movement phase, and it takes half your movement to stand up. So if your big hero's knocked prone, then you lose priority. You're doing heroic movements in order to get hopefully steal priority from your opponent so you can stand up. Okay, and then you can lie down. Lying down also takes half your movement to do so, and I have seen situations where somebody will run a model behind a barrier of some sort and then go prone just so they can't be seen, which I think is smart. So that's pretty much everything in the movement phase. Took a little bit longer than I expected to talk about, but I'm not surprised since we covered moving, the different lengths of moving, the different types of moving, be they cavalry or infantry. There's one other movement ability, and that's a special rule called fly. And you can move 12 inches with that, and you ignore control zones. So that's huge. Crabine have this. Bat swarms have this. What are those things called? Felbeast. Thank you. I could not think of it. Felbeast have them. It's very, very useful because you can move 12 inches. That's a quarter of the board. That's huge. And then you also ignore control zones. So, yeah, guys, that is everything. We talked about movement, types of movement, leaping, climbing, and jump tests. And then prone models, standing up, sitting down, going to ground is what it's called. And, yeah, that's all of it. So thanks for staying tuned. Thanks for watching, listening. Hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave a link or a comment below. Next time I'll talk about shooting and go from there. As always, guys, thanks for following along. Please like, share, and subscribe to Tolkien Fanatics so you can get all kinds of Tolkien content. And I will see you in the next video.